Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Transcription services provided by transcribeme.com. Visit them on the web at transcribeme.com/BeanCast for up to 25% off. That's transcribeme.com. Episode 516, Making the Pie. For Monday, October 15th, 2018. It's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob North. Thanks for joining us. In the age of social media, we've been told time and again that transparency is what consumers expect from their brands. However, what consumers tell researchers is not always how they act. Does every brand need to be transparent? Tonight, we'll discuss. Also, good design as a replacement for traditional marketing, whether mobile makes email less urgent, why podcasting is the new blogging, plus this week's Ad Fail 5. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the founder and president of Convince and Convert, author, speaker, Mr. Jay Baer. Hi, Jay.
Hello, Bob. Great to be back.
Now, also joining us, we have digital futurist, Mr. Colin Glaum. Colin, welcome back.
Thanks, Bob. Great to talk to you.
Great talking to you as well. And finally, we say hello to founding partner of Creative Shop Campfire, Mr. Mike Monello. Mike, hi, how are you?
Good evening. Thanks for having me on.
Well, we've got a lot to cover as usual, and I'm going to jump right into the topics. First up, a recent study has reaffirmed that many have been saying for a decade or more, that consumers are demanding transparency from the companies they choose to do business with. They want fast, direct contact and demand total honesty and openness from their brands. At least this is what the survey says. But Jay, when you think of the most successful tech brands like Amazon, Google, Apple, you find nothing but opacity. You don't find hardly any transparency from these companies. So why the disconnect, and what does it mean for the theory that all brands need to be transparent in this digital age?
Yeah, I'm not even sure what transparency from a brand actually means. Right? Are we talking about authenticity, right? That we want brands or are we talking about humanity, that we want brands to treat us as human beings? I think we're conflating customer experience and transparency here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which is really interesting, right? It's not the same thing.
No, I fully agree. I think that we are conflating issues when we talk about transparency, because people who talk about transparency go all over the map on it. But I think what it means in the minds of a consumer, and this is where it really counts, when you're talking about a survey that's consumer-based, getting the opinions of consumers about who they want to do business with, when they say transparency, they're thinking undoubtedly honesty, telling the full truth, being completely open. And these are things that are just
typically in a reactive scenario, right? More so than a proactive scenario. The way I take this survey, because it was done by Sprout Social, and so the way I interpret this is it's more of a customer service scenario, which makes sense, right? In that situation where like, hey, something has gone wrong, or I need information from this brand for some reason, then transparency and authenticity and forthrightness would certainly be a plus. The one stat in here, Bob, I kind of downloaded the whole study and looked it through. The one thing I found was really interesting is that 67% of the consumers surveyed say that video is the most transparent medium.
What? Do we really believe that, or is that something that's
I do, and for this reason, because I've done quite a bit of writing and research on this topic, and in a customer service context,
okay,
video is really, really terrific. The example I use all the time is when Southwest Airlines had a giant snafu and all the flights were canceled and it took days to recover. They went on their Facebook page and instantly did a Facebook Live with their chief operating officer saying, hey, we screwed up. We're really sorry. Here's what's going to happen. They just turned on a phone, did it on an iPhone, just turned on a phone and had their COO talk into it. I don't know if I would use the word transparency, but that level of forthrightness and authenticity, I think, is attractive to consumers, and maybe that's what this study is trying to get at.
And let me just say, as a producer of the Blair Witch Project, that I can say factually that video is not more transparent than any other format.
Right. Perceptually, yes. Factually, not so much.
That's a good point there, Mike. You totally lied to everybody. Well, Colin, what's your take on this situation? I mean, authenticity, transparency, they're not the same thing. And when you're talking about being authentic, that's a whole different story. That's what brands have done for decades. It's this approach of trying to present yourself in the best possible light and to, deliver on the promises of your brand at every single execution point, at every single experiential point. So authenticity, I can totally buy, but transparency, it doesn't seem to make sense for many brands. In fact, it could potentially be, disastrous in a lot of instances.
I don't disagree with that statement, but I come at it from a completely different point of view because I spent most of my career selling things to people that they will ultimately consume. So whether it was Mountain Dew or Doritos or an OTC product or most recently CBD products, when you're asking something or when you're asking a person to physically ingest the thing that you're selling, you need to be 100% direct and authentic with them, whether it's crap like Mountain Dew or Doritos, and just be fun and irreverent with it because they have nothing really to stand behind. But if you're going to be selling something that people are looking for a remedy to a physical ailment that they might have, you need to be really on the up and up. And I think that kind of authenticity and honesty, whether it's in a consumer service point of view or just literally like what are you going to expect to get out of this experience when you buy our product, is the number one thing that people are looking for now. And I think that the example that was given is a great way of saying, hey, we're going to open the kimono and this is what really happens behind the glass wall of an airline or behind a pharmaceutical company or whatever it may be. When you share with that audience your real truth, they are going to feel more connected to you, and at least not like you're just trying to sell them on something. So if you have a real shortcoming to overcome or to address, I think a great example was just from this summer. Kentucky Fried Chicken in Europe, I guess their supply chain logistics got messed up somewhere along the line, and they ran out of chicken, and they had to shutter their stores for 2 weeks in the UK. So they ran an ad that went across, most of at least the UK and other parts of Europe that just said FCK rather than KFC with an empty bucket in it. And it was a mea culpa. It was like, hey, we're going to make this right, but in the meantime, we're sorry we can't serve you fried chicken for the next 2 weeks. That kind of authenticity and honesty.
I don't know that that's authenticity and honesty as much as you got to do something because your business is going to tank. So it was this clever messaging, which again sounds like traditional marketing. It doesn't sound like any kind of new thinking. It doesn't sound like true transparency. It just like nobody got involved online and started explaining the logistics issues. They just said we screwed up, which is true. And it's just like that's authentic.
Well, that's at least a step, but that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I'm not
avoid even talking about it altogether.
No, I agree with you 100%. I think that it was the absolute right thing for them to do, but I don't know that I can call it transparency. Someone else was going to jump in. I'm sorry.
Well, I think, I think in consumers' minds, transparency is also related to consistency between what the brand is constantly saying and what they do. So, you mentioned Amazon, I think, as an example of opacity. And you look at their mission statement, it's about offering the lowest prices, the best selection, and complete convenience. So when a controversy erupts like Amazon workers' pay rights or just their pay, I think people feel badly and they'd like to see those people get paid, but they don't. But they don't feel like Amazon's really hiding that, because of course they're screwing their customers. Their mission is to offer the lowest prices, or their employees. Their mission is to offer lowest prices and best available selection. So I think when they try to hide that from the public, it's not seen as being not transparent in a weird way. It's kind of consistent with what they say. Whereas when you look at Facebook, a company that I think is being looked at as very untransparent, their mission is to give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. So it doesn't fit, because that's not where their revenue comes from.
And that
when
goes
they
back.
lie,
That goes
they
back.
cover up that aspect. It feels completely untransparent.
Yeah, but that goes back to the question of, is it authenticity that consumers want, or is it transparency? And I think again and again in this conversation, we keep coming back to authenticity is what consumers want. They want what you're telling them you're going to do with their data and with their experience to actually happen. You know, I don't think that consumers want to know how the pie is made. They don't really care.
They don't care about how the pie is made. I agree with that 100%. They don't agree how the pie is made. But if you step out, I have a longstanding belief that brands should be viewed as living, breathing things. If you think of your brand as a person at a cocktail party and you're open and honest and vulnerable, you're going to attract a lot more people to your side. If you're going to stand there and pontificate about all the things that make you awesome and not be real, well, then you're just going to be another person at a cocktail party who's the least popular person at the dance. You know, like it's not just about authenticity. It's about being the truest version of who you are as a company. And that to me is like, we're splitting hairs between authenticity and honesty, because those two things in my mind go hand in hand.
But for me, it goes back to that initial question that I started this whole conversation off with. And Jay, I want to go back to you on this one, because when I talk about Amazon, or we talk about Google, or we talk about Apple, or we talk about Facebook, these aren't just any companies. These are the most valuable companies in the world. And all of them are not transparent. In fact, they are the antithesis of transparency. They are, if anything, completely opaque. They don't let people know what's going on with their algorithms. They don't let people know what's going on behind the scenes. Customer service, you know, with Amazon's case and Apple's case is pretty good, but you still don't get an insight into what's happening at the company. You just get good service throughout the experience. It seems to me that even though consumers say they want transparency, their actions show that they couldn't give a crap about transparency, because these are the most valuable companies and they're not being transparent.
Yeah, I think there's probably a correlation between monopolistic power and the need to be transparent. And I think you're right that customers say they want one thing, but they vote with their wallet in a different way entirely, which is why, and we've talked about on this show so often in the past, every time there's some sort of consumer privacy dust up, oh, Facebook got our accounts hacked and this and that, and now they're tracking us this way. Everybody wrings their hands for 2 weeks and then goes back and does the exact same thing. I don't see anybody in large measure deleting their accounts. I don't see people saying enough is enough, which is one of the dangers, as you said at the outset, of survey work, right? Because this is not a survey of how do consumers behave. This is a survey of what consumers think they want,
right?
Which maybe isn't necessarily the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what does all this mean for the army of social consultants out there, Mike? I mean, obviously social media people are always talking about transparency, and I'm not coming down on social media consultants overall, because there's a lot of really good ones. But at the same time, there's an army of social media consultants preaching the gospel of transparency. What do we do with that? I mean, it's just like, are they right in theory, and we're just conflating words and it's just the term that everybody uses, so we shouldn't worry about it? Or do we need to make some active measures in order to become more clear about what we're trying to convey to our clients about what transparency means, what authenticity means, and what you should be communicating to your client?
Yeah, I mean that I think we need to be more specific when we use these words like transparency and authenticity. I mean, honestly, I think the word transparency is just being used in place of authenticity because we've overused authenticity and turned it into kind of a buzzword. It's a bit of a joke when a marketer says that now. So we've just replaced it with transparency, and I'm sure give it a month or two and we'll have another word for the same thing.
Transparency's been around for an awful long time, though. So let me go here back to Jay, because it's just like I heard you laughing because I know that this is a large part of what you talk about. I mean, obviously, I bring this up to you not to put you on the spot, because I know your approach to transparency, authenticity, and social media, and you at least present a lot of ethical approaches to doing it. So this is not coming against you, but obviously there are a lot of people out there who are doing it completely wrong, or at least doing it so in a kind of buzzwordy type way that doesn't really communicate to their clients' true approaches. So how do we fix this problem?
I don't know that there's a fix, and I don't know that there's an empirical truth, but I'll tell you this. What I've experienced in my own social media content that I create on behalf of myself, and certainly the work that we undertake for brands, is that everybody wants to make a movie, and sometimes you're better off making a documentary. It was mentioned earlier that customers don't want to see the sausage being made. That's true, kind of. But one of the things that I
wish someone had said the sausage.
I
wish someone had said, "Spin." No one wants to see the sausage being made. Someone said they don't want to see the pie being made. So apparently, someone got it completely wrong when he didn't say it.
Better analogy. But I do feel like consumers do have an appetite for behind the scenes, right? And one of the things that we consistently harp on with clients is the things that clients find boring, customers find fascinating, because they're not used to it. It's not, they don't overlook it. They think it's interesting. I was doing a speech recently for a giant group of thousands of plumbers. And I'm like, look, you are bored by plumbing because you've been doing plumbing your whole life, but your customers are fascinated by plumbing because they don't understand it. So if you just shot an Instagram video once a day and talked for a minute about some weird plumbing thing, people would love it. And that's when I say movie versus documentary, that's the kind of thing I mean. Now, is that transparency? I guess, but it's not trying to sell you something, at least not overtly. And that's where we're really, I think that's where we've lost our way. As always, and this should surprise nobody who listens to this show, as Gary Vaynerchuk says, marketers ruin everything. And we have turned social into the media, not just social, right? Social media is about media. It's not about social, not like it once was. And I think if we can get back to that a little bit, people actually respond pretty well.
Well, we're going to move on, and we're going to talk next about whether design alone can do the job of marketing. It's an interesting question, and one that I think that we can dig our teeth into for a healthy debate. But first, we're going to have a word from our sponsor, AdRoll.
I got this phone call about 5:30, 6 a.m., was tasked with devising a go-to-market strategy for a rebrand. We knew that we had resonated with those hikers or those surfers or skiers, but we needed to expand our reach and make sure that these people were able to go from the boardroom to the board with our sunglasses. AdRoll was definitely instrumental in getting this new brand out there, both from a prospecting and remarketing standpoint, and they kind of helped me break down how the funnel looked and how we wanted to position our messaging. I was getting slacks from everyone at the company when they'd see an ad somewhere, like in the New York Times. Everyone was super stoked to see our new content and our new brand creative out there. They definitely helped me shine internally at Sunski from a marketing standpoint.
To find out how Sunski and 37,000 other brands grow their businesses with AdRoll, visit adroll.com/BeanCast. That's ADROLL.com/BeanCast.
Well, moving on, the former design chief at IKEA, Marcus Engman, has a message for brands out there. Design of products, packaging, and experiences is more important than most of your other marketing efforts. He believes in this so much that he's co-founded a consultancy that aims to steal away marketing dollars in the name of enhancing brand perception through improved design. Mike, first of all, do you agree with this premise? And second of all, does it simply challenge marketing norms, or is this about eliminating the need for marketing altogether? What's your take on the idea of marketing becoming just a design challenge?
Well, I think it's a really smart positioning for his consultancy, but I don't agree that design is more important than anything else. It works as, I think, a bit of sales puffery, but it's really kind of a myopic view of how people relate to products and brands. I think it's an example of how when you make hammers, every problem starts to look like a nail. So I don't believe it's an either or situation. I think you need obviously products and packaging and experiences that are well designed and consistent across every touch point from the communications on. But design alone isn't going to make everything else obsolete. So I don't think it's challenging marketing norms, and I don't think it eliminates the needs for marketing. I think we do see sometimes some industries get disrupted by an upstart that manages to cause a stir without marketing itself. But typically, once they get to a certain size, they all start marketing and advertising. So, I think like I said, I think it's a nice positioning for the consultancy.
Yeah, well said. I mean, I think that a large part of this is, positioning for something new that he's launching. So I understand that. But, I teach marketing management at NYU. And one of the things that strikes me about reading the marketing management books and getting into the basics of marketing is marketing starts at the product design. It starts with the idea. It starts well before the communications picture comes into play, So in a large way, reclaiming design is actually potentially the most pure form of marketing that there is. I mean, I can totally see his point that design of product, that making something excellent creates word of mouth, creates interest in the company and the brand, designing packaging,
but
designing
Bob,
experience.
has there ever been a time when that hasn't been true?
There's been lots of times where poor product design does quite well. It's just like, or cheap product design does quite well. I mean, being excellent through design is not the province of every single brand. Every single brand, some brands just have like mediocre design and they do quite well because they have a lock on a market or they're unique in some way. I mean, the Snuggie is not an amazing product, it's just like, it's not excellent design, but it's functional design and it came off at the exact right time and it made a mint. So,
Yeah, and they were very good at marketing.
And they were very good at marketing.
So that's it, right? I mean, it's not a zero-sum game here. I think if we, I feel like this is going to be the show about semantics. If we replace the word if we replace the word design with customer experience, then I feel better about this, right? Because is customer experience required for a successful product or service? At some level, yes, and more so than ever. There's great research from Walker that suggests that by 2020, a majority of customer buying decisions will be based on experience. And that's certainly a first world problem, right? Your economy is good when you can choose to make decisions based on customer experience, not price or availability or other factors. And as somebody who just wrote a book about word of mouth, I think this is interesting because this is a low funnel way to promote a product or service, right? Because you can't say we're going to get customers because our design's so good, because only the customers who have already experienced the design know the design is good, right? So you can't create demand this way. You can take your current customers and turn them into more customers through word of mouth by having disproportionately good design or disproportionately good customer experience. And from that perspective, I agree with the premise. But this idea that you don't need to create demand, you don't need to introduce your products to the world because your design is that good, no, I don't think that's true.
Yeah, Colin, I want to bring you in on this because this is your bread and butter, marketing and advertising. Actually, we're all involved with marketing and advertising in some way, shape, or form, but you've been doing nuts and bolts, direct marketing, digital marketing, advertising. That's been your bailiwick. How do you feel about these comments, and how does design mesh with the marketing messaging that you need to do in order to make sure that the design is well represented through the communication part of the funnel?
So I work a lot in the CPG space where everything's a commodity, and the dental floss pick that you're selling is exactly the same as the other dental floss picks on the market. And I scream for the need for them to think about the product differently, because the design is everything in that. It's a functional product, right? It's supposed to do one thing and it has to do it very well. The way that you can change or augment the view of the category or the product you're talking about is through design. So I think I agree with everything the panel's been saying. Great products sell themselves. Beautiful objects, sell themselves. And I think that the article that you surfaced from the design engineer at IKEA, he's 100% correct in his sentiment in regards to the importance of design. But I think what he was trying to say was that the masses of the millions of dollars that are being spent in media could be reappropriated to design, and I think that's 100% correct. And I'll take that concept one step further in advertising in general. In an era where really contagious content can spread almost at will, I think media dollars need to be reappropriated to production dollars. What we're doing right now is seeing very, very low production value and people spending lots of money trying to get it in front, like the wrong message in front of people. Go out and create a really great, awesome message, and then put it into a place where everyone can share it for free, and let the awesome content that you've created do the exact same thing. I think the same aesthetic or the same principle for design that you would do for the product could be applied to marketing and advertising. I'll give you an example. There's a series of content that I'm very fond of from DC Shoes. They have this guy named Ken Block who is a race car like aficionado, and they go out and create these amazing experiences for this guy to race through. They film them. They shut down one of the examples is they blocked off all the streets in San Francisco and let this guy go wild through the city. And they took that one piece of content for whatever it cost them to shoot for that day. They put it online, and it has been viewed tens of millions of times because it's an amazing piece of content. They haven't spent a dime on media dollars. They put everything into the production of that piece of content. And I think the same thing applies to the design of products. If you shifted your weight to making a really, really awesome product, you would have to spend less money advertising it in the long run.
So okay, I can buy that premise that that a lot of the media dollars that are spent are wasted and they're not effective anyway. So why not put it into rethinking, reimagining, re-engineering your product, improving the design, making it something that's worth talking about? I mean, I can see that working, but does it really replace reach and frequency as a model? It seems to me that there's got to be a break-even point where you still need to get your message out to the right people at the right time, the right amount of times, in order for somebody to pay attention to you and to see, wow, this really is a great design. Wow, this is really cool. It seems to me that there's no replacing reach and frequency in the end. Am I right, or am I wrong about that?
No, I think you're absolutely right. It's always going to need to be a mix, but I would argue that you could spend less on reach and frequency if you had a better product.
I completely agree. I mean,
I agree.
You've said this, Bob, I think on the show, or I'm sure we're all familiar with it, that advertising at some level is a tax on the unremarkable. And I think that's really what we're saying here, right? That if you make a disproportionate,
I'm stealing that line. That's an amazing line.
That if you make a disproportionately good product, then you have to advertise less because your customers become volunteer marketers. That's the idea, right? The challenge there, while that is manifestly true, is that, to Bob's point, it takes longer to work, because the only way that happens is for a customer to consume or interact with the product in question, and then they tell somebody who then has to become a new customer. So it can totally work. It's just that we don't typically rely solely on word of mouth because of the elongated success horizon it requires to actually make it happen. So what happens in the real world is you take a product, hopefully it's good, maybe you can make it better, and then you amplify its strengths with some sort of reach and frequency, and hopefully the 2 points meet in the middle.
There's a point that I've been making on the show for quite a while, and it comes down to whether or not a new brand, an introductory brand, is benefited from doing reach and frequency as opposed to creating word of mouth and creating great experiences first. Because there's no doubt that advertising, traditional reach and frequency, works for McDonald's, that it works for Geico. Because they're a big brand that you recognize, and when you see an ad, it reminds you that they exist and that they still have, 15 minutes or less can save you $1,500 in your car insurance or whatever it is. It reminds you of these messages. But a new brand is less served by the reach and frequency message, mostly because they don't have the money to spend to get that kind of reach and frequency that a McDonald's can deliver. and it doesn't seem to be as effective. So in that way, I think that this guy's spot on. If we're talking about, introductory brands, new brands that don't have any mental capital, no mind share out there, yeah, I can see how design would totally shift the needle. I'm less sure that it has a noticeable impact for your average toothpaste brand. It's just like it may have a slight impact.
I'll give you two examples. One will be in reference to Geico. I could have easily gotten my insurance from Geico, but I saw a very slick advertisement in Instagram for a company called Lemonade. And I do all of my insurance now through this company called Lemonade, and it's literally $5 a month.
Those guys are killing it.
And it's a beautiful interface. It's easy. It's super slick, and there's no friction whatsoever, as opposed to me trying to call Geico and spend 15. I mean, I literally got all of my insurance set up in under 5 minutes, rather than taking 15 minutes to save whatever, or taking whatever it is to save 15% on my car insurance. I literally did this through my phone while I was, in a restroom. So like it's that design in that regard.
So now we know what you do when you're on the toilet.
But the gosh, what was the second one I was going to give you? We were talking about design interface. I lost it. But anyway,
it's my fault.
The lemonade is the lemonade one was the perfect example in response to Geico. So I think you can, when you're talking about upstarts. If you live in New York City, you see things like Casper, you see things like Seamless, and their advertising is very simple. It's very beautiful. It's easy to digest, and you just feel a warmth and an appreciation for. There's a brand coming through it, and when you're talking about those upstarts, the design is what's going to lure you into it in the first place, and it makes it a little bit more palatable to jump into something that feels maybe foreign, if you're not in the market for a boxable mattress,
Well, moving on, an interesting study I read this week seems to suggest that email, which overall is still a pretty high priority activity in business, I think all of us can attest to the fact that email plays a big part of our lives on a daily basis. It's not as high a priority for mobile users, though, which I found to be quite surprising. Which for email marketers is pretty troubling news, especially if you're communicating time-sensitive information. You want somebody to act quickly on an offer. You have something that has an expiration date on it. So what does this mean for the tactic of reaching mobile audiences, Colin? I mean, do we have to shift and change everything that we're doing, or is this less of a concern for you as an email marketer? What's your take?
It's I wouldn't say it's concerning. I'm probably either the least or most qualified person to talk about this subject, and I'll tell you why. I despise email, yet it's one of the things that I do for work. If you were to sit in a meeting with anyone from my team, they would just be cackling at the fact that I'm answering this question. Because whenever I open up my computer and project it onto a screen, they see that I have over 77,000 unopened emails in my inbox, and so. Email for me, to your point, is like if you want to reach me and if you want to do something important for me or with me, it's a text. It's in something like Slack. It's in Trello. It's in Asana. I'm less focused on email. For me, email is like a CYA technology. Cover your ass. It's a paper trail similar to like the mimeograph back in the day. Technology that moves projects and businesses forward have migrated substantially in the last couple of years, and I just named a couple of them. I think the biggest issue that I have with email when it comes to businesses is just the pure lack of etiquette that's understood for the platform. I can't tell you the number of emails I get with a subject line that has absolutely zero to do with the content that's associated with it. I don't know if it's like because they're trying to make things like clickbait or what it is, but like the actual act of email has become so spammy that I've shifted my focus now to things that actually make me more productive as a person, whether that's picking up the phone and calling somebody or using the other methods of
But this is not necessarily about email in general, because all these things that you're saying are very, very true about the problems with email. I think specifically this study was talking about the fact that
Marketing.
No, they were talking about mobile email. That when consumers are on mobile devices, email becomes a lot less of a priority for them. And, they may browse their email subject lines, but they usually save things for later when they can get on a desktop and can do it properly or whatever. I mean, I don't understand these people. I do everything on my phone. I mean, I'm constantly doing everything, but I'm assuming this is what's going on. And, that presents a big challenge for marketers. We thought it was about mobile optimization, but it seems like consumers are less interested in reading any kind of marketing messaging via their mobile device at all, and more likely to respond.
I don't know that that's true, though, Bob.
That's what I'm
remember. I mean, we have to remember that on your computer, you're not getting push notifications, at least not very often. Some people have messages set up on their laptop, but most do not. Whereas on your phone, you're getting push notifications potentially from social media, but certainly from texting and SMS. And we've been moving a lot of our clients away from email, not exclusively, but moving some messaging from email to SMS and texting. What we have observed, and there's data on this as well, I just can't put my finger on it right now, is that consumers' previous wariness about branded SMS here in the United States is fading away. As long as you're sending things that have relevancy, that are on time, that aren't just straight spam.
And permission
appetite
based
for that is a lot higher than it was a couple years ago, and the open rate difference is ridiculous, right? Average open rate for an email is like 18 points now. Average open rate for a text is 91%.
Right, but we're still talking about a completely permission-based platform when you're talking about anything to do with text messaging, because if it's unsolicited, it becomes a major intrusion. Whereas with email, we still get away with doing unsolicited emails and having quite a lot of success with them, don't we? Anybody?
The first part, I don't know about the second part. I mean, do people still send unsolicited emails? Sure, they're not supposed to for a number of reasons.
Well, they wouldn't send them if
otherwise. But I'm not sure we can say that people are getting or having the same kind of success they once did.
No, they're certainly not getting the same kind of success they once did. But this is the same argument we have every time we talk about any kind of direct marketing. We can say that nobody wants your direct mail package and that response rates are 0.01%, but you still end up, it just takes that one who responds to it. And it's a game of numbers. You mail out 1 million pieces, you're going to get some kind of response, and it works. So why not do it?
But isn't this kind of pitting of email against text messaging just an example of kind of something being a little bit shiny and new? The idea that brands can reach out to us via text message, or that they will, or that will accept it, means, and there are fewer brands doing it, means that they're more successful. But as more and more brands jump on that bandwagon, it's just going to become like email, and we're going to ignore those messages.
I know exactly what you're saying, but I hope not. What we're seeing is that what the smart brands are doing is thinking about what messages are we sending that really don't need a lot of back and forth, that are purely transactional or alert status kind of things. And can you do that effectively in an SMS to break through the inbox clutter? It's the same reason why some brands are finally starting to figure out Facebook Messenger now and doing some interesting transactionally driven exchanges there as well. I hope it doesn't just become let me send you a text message of our stupid newsletter, because I don't think that's going to work, and I don't think consumers will tolerate it. But if it's hey, your package has shipped, I'd just as soon get a text than an email, because I'll actually see it on my phone. I might not see it in my inbox.
Yeah, I hope so. I just don't have faith in
and any of us or the listeners. I understand. I understand entirely.
I may be the only person on the entire planet who still enjoys email. Email is my brain, because it's just like I've worked out. I use it as a power user uses it. I mean, I employ flags so that I never have stuff go into the ether. I use Apple Mail because Apple Mail allows me to search the entire database, not just the folders, so I can find anything at any time. I don't have to, go through and file emails in certain folders, because if I remember it, I can find it. It's easy. You know, I love email. I have no problem with it. I do it entirely on my mobile device. This whole conversation, quite frankly, baffles me, but I guess this is what's happening.
You're obviously not the average consumer, though, Bob. And not to mention the fact I've got a 20-year-old and a 17-year-old at home, right? It's a great R&D lab. The one thing they have no interest in whatsoever is email. The only reason my daughter has an email address is because her university makes her have one.
Yeah, we talk about this over and over again, and yet every single one of these teens to 20-year-olds who are in college eventually go into the workplace and they adopt email. You know, it's just like email is not going anywhere. It's part of our lifestyle. It's part of the business world. Yes, there are some tools that help with workflow. I mean, Colin mentioned a whole bunch of them, everything from Asana to Slack. I mean, those types of tools, you know, can really help with the communication process. And certainly text messaging is the priority way to get in touch with a friend or somebody who you really need to reach right away. But, you know, email still is the record upon which we, you know, as Colin said, CYA, cover your ass. I mean, we do it with this document system, and it still works beautifully. I can't see it just being replaced entirely by anything else.
But text messages are interruptive, and that by the very nature is going to change what works in text versus what works in email, right? I mean,
right.
If you ask me, do I want to receive package updates or do I want to receive a reminder about my doctor's appointment, and I say yes, I've asked for that. There's a value to that to me. So when I get that text message, I go, oh, great. But if you hit me with a text message while I'm in the middle of a game telling me that I've got 24 hours to hit some sale or buy some special product at a special price, you're going on my blacklist. I mean, end of discussion. I don't want that. And I don't think most people do. Whereas in email, you can send me that stuff because email's not interruptive. I prioritize it. The reason I think open rates are so low is because a lot of people just let it sit in their email. I do this. I let things that are not important, that don't need to be opened right now during the workday, sit in my email box. And then sometimes at the end of the day or when I have a break, I might go back and open the ones that are interesting and toss out the ones that are not. This
is so insightful, Mike. I mean, it's just like, I think this is the heart of the issue. That if you need to get it out right away and you have the permission, text messaging makes the most sense on a mobile device. I mean, it makes the most sense for reaching out to your consumers or to your business partners. But when it comes to a non-time sensitive message or a message without permission, yeah, absolutely. Email is still the best tool to use because you can prioritize. You can say, this is not something I'm interested in right now. This is something that I can easily delete. Or this is something I want to save to respond to later. It gives you those options, and I can see that balance playing a part in this. Well, I'm going to move on to the final topic because it's near and dear to our hearts here, Jay. Seth Godin officially proclaimed podcasting as the new blogging this week, thereby making it official. There are too many damn podcasts. Considering the saturation level, Jay, is it still worth starting a new podcast today? Are you recommending it to your clients? Are you actively creating podcasts for them? What's your take on this?
It's a tricky question. I think Seth is incorrect to suggest that podcasting is the new blogging for a couple of reasons. Podcasting at its best has a usage hurdle that blogging simply doesn't, not for the creator, but for the consumer, right? To read a blog post, I have to have a browser. To listen to a podcast, I have to have an app. I have to be able to find the podcast. I have to download the podcast and then spend somewhere between 15 and 60 minutes listening to it, which is a lot bigger commitment than reading a blog post.
Wait a minute. That's not exactly true because I can go to my browser and go to the website of almost any podcast and listen to it right through the browser the same way I can.
That is true. That is true, but only about 30% of podcasts are listened to in that way now. So more and more you're seeing podcasts obviously through apps, now through the car, things like that. So, but I think we can agree that that podcasting is a little trickier for consumers than reading a blog post. So I don't think the equivalency argument that Seth makes is entirely accurate. However, podcasting does have some advantages over blogging as well. I mean, it has a level of intimacy that blogging can't match. There's no replacement for talking into somebody's head for an hour a week. It has some great subscription opportunities now, right? When you get podcasts on an app, they'll feed it up every week. It's kind of like what we used to have with feed, when we had actual RSS feeders. Like, we don't really use those anymore, but so we've got that. I think the issue though is there are a ton of podcasts, and the advice that we give clients, and even when we start new podcasts at Convince and Convert, is you have to find a hole in the market. Here's exactly the words I say, Bob. I say, the only way you can start a podcast today is if your show will be some people's favorite podcast in the world. So unless you know who those people are and what podcast they are going to stop listening to in order to listen to yours, don't start one. If you have a really interesting idea in a really specific target audience, I think you can still be a success with a podcast started today. But this idea of just turn on the microphone, it's just really hard to break through at this point.
I take a different tack, just a little bit different tack when I talk to clients about podcasting, because when it comes to creating a podcast, I think everybody still thinks it's a radio show. It's easy to make that misdiagnosis, that misperception that somehow this is a radio show because it sounds like a radio show. And because it's a radio shows are judged on how many listeners you actually get into the funnel. And for me, I'm always like, how many people do you really need to reach? Because that's all that matters. It doesn't matter whether or not your podcast breaks through. If your objective is to reach these 15, 20 donors who are member, it's just like, it makes no difference.
But that's a micro targeting approach.
But I think that's where
very successful.
That's where
I think we're saying the same thing a different way.
Right, exactly. But for me, when I'm talking about podcasting, I'm saying that's the true value of podcasting. It's not about creating some kind of audience or breaking through. It's always about reaching out to your micro audiences. Now, if you want to be a big time podcaster and create a radio show and have something to compete against the NPR entries into this space, I mean, fine, do it. But I mean, I built the success of this show based on the premise that, 11% of the marketing population may eventually listen to my show. And, quite frankly, that's not a very big number. I mean, there's a lot of people in marketing and advertising, but it's not nearly the numbers that are going to be listening to All Things Considered when it comes to podcasting. So, for me, it feels a little like blogging because of that, because blogging was always built on these micro audiences with a few standouts who had general audiences. So I'm not necessarily disagreeing with him. I think that there are elements of the new blogging in place. What I'm concerned about is that just like blogging, it'll become quickly saturated, and there'll just be some that'll go corporate and, have lots and lots of listeners and readers. And it's just like the rest of us will be drowned out in the noise as opposed to actually having any effect like we once did. Mike, you were going to say something.
Yeah, well, so I agree with most everything that's been said so far, except that I want to challenge you on the blog. I really disagree with the blogging metaphor.
Okay.
Podcasting isn't going to boost your SEO, drive people to your website in the same way that blogging did. I mean, I think there were a lot of other positives to blogging that went alongside why people would do it. But podcasting is more like developing a television series than blogging. And you prove it every episode because you have a format, which is what's required. And podcasting requires you can't just be an insightful writer. You need to be a good performer. You need to be able to handle the technical aspects of recording, mixing, and editing great audio. And you need to consistently produce on a schedule. And you need to come up with either a format or a story that is going to actually power week after week after week of episodes. And that's just radically different than
you make it sound exactly like
this marketing.
You make it sound exactly like the slog that it is.
Yeah.
But it's good.
I heard that. I'm at episode 350, so I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah,
I mean, that said, right? I think if we step away from the idea of brands, as a creator, I am extremely bullish on podcasts. I mean, I see the same energy and opportunity in the podcast space that I saw in indie film back in the mid to late 90s. So I think it's a very exciting space for creators. I'm not sure that if your reason for getting into podcasting is to market something, that it's maybe quite as fertile a space.
Good point. Good point there. Colin, any last thoughts on this subject? I mean, what do you think about podcasting? Is it the new blogging, or is it something that is completely different and still valuable to brands? I mean, what's your take?
I think it's extremely valuable. I view it as the upgrade of the blog, which might be counter to what the rest of the panel has said. But my take on it is you have a layer of intimacy that comes from the human voice, and in some instances, seeing the person who's sharing the information with you that you can't get from the word, from 12-point Helvetica type on a glowing screen. So I think that there's, I'm very bullish on the medium. I point a lot of my clients in this direction because I think you're reaching a certain demographic that's very difficult to reach otherwise, at least in the United States. And you can be very, very specific about the content that you align with and know that it's a safe space for your brand to be. So I think from a branding standpoint, maybe not for a podcaster, but from a marketing and advertising standpoint, it's a great medium to be associated with.
Well, with that, it's time for the Ad Fail 5. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with Jay Baer. And I know he has a big plug. You can find him at convinceandconvert.com. So tell us, Jay, tell us about your book. Go ahead.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, brand new book called Talk Triggers, The Complete Guide to Creating Customers with Word of Mouth, written with my dear friend Daniel Lemon. It's a step-by-step manual for how to do some of the things we talked about here on the show today. Do something different in the operations of your business that gets your customers talking. The mistake that we make, I think, in business too often is we assume that competency creates conversation, that being a good company will cause word of mouth, but that doesn't really happen. What nobody ever says is, hey, let me tell you about this perfectly adequate experience I just had. We need to do something a little different, and that's what this book is all about. A talk trigger gives you that opportunity to get your customers talking and build your business accordingly. It's in all the places you can get books and at talktriggers.com.
Fantastic. Awesome. Yeah, definitely check out Jay's book. He's a great writer. I still quote the intro to one of your books all the time. So next up, Colin Glaum. I don't know where you can find Colin these days. He's kind of in transition, got big news coming up, but tell us what's going on in your world. What would you like to promote?
I'm actually working with an amazing company right now called Charlotte's Web. It's a CBD company out of Colorado. And they're going to be doing an activation out in Los Angeles or in the Palm Springs area, actually. So if you're out that way, go check out Wellspring. They're going to have an amazing experience in the booth, as well as an after party on Saturday night out in the desert. It's going to be a very awesome kind of celebratory way to communicate to people who have overcome a lot of the different physical issues that you might face through the power of this botanical. And I encourage anyone who's in that area to swing by and come out and check it out.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm glad that you mentioned that because it's just like, I wasn't sure from our talk whether or not I could tell people about it. I'm glad that you got a chance to let everybody know about what you're doing. And finally, Mike Monello, you can find him at campfirenyc.com. That's the home of his fantastic shop that's doing some amazing creative work, digital work, content work, and experiential work. Tell us what's going on in your world, Mike. What would you like to promote?
We are keeping busy at Campfire, so definitely go to campfirenyc.com and check it out and get in touch if that looks interesting to you. I have something to promote that I'm not allowed to completely reveal, but I have a personal project coming up just in time for Halloween, which I'm very excited about. So maybe look me up on Twitter at Mike Monello. And I'll be able to announce more once it's been officially made public.
Okay, very mysterious, but sounds awesome. Definitely check that out. And as for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me. You can even find out how to advertise on the program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And don't forget, We now have transcription services thanks to transcribeme.com. Go to transcribeme.com/BeanCast and you can get a special discount off your first transcription. Check them out. They're a great sponsor. We love them. Transcribeme.com/BeanCast. And now it's time for the Ad Fail 5, a rundown of the lowest moments in advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. And first up, Colin, Kanye West, do we need to say more, had lunch with the president this past week, where in the midst of his ranting, he credited Trump for inspiring the Adidas, or Adidas, depending on where you are in the world, contract for his Yeezy brand. Now, I don't know about you, but considering the fact that on the other side, when Nike was seen as doing something too liberal, people were burning shoes, I have a feeling that Adidas has got to be completely terrified that the exact same thing is going to happen if word starts spreading about the fact that he actually did this and said that Trump is responsible for inspiring him to get the Adidas contract.
Especially when you see how ugly the new Yeezys are. Yeah, the entire
somebody
thing,
said
I think
he's
both
Yeezus.
of them are marketing geniuses. Yeah, both of them are marketing geniuses, though. They know how to control the media. I mean, both of them are, for whatever reason, unassailable, and no matter how ridiculous they get. So I'm clearly doing something wrong, and I should be taking a note from either one of them.
Don't say that. Say it's not so.
I kind of feel like Kanye is Banksy, but without anything to say.
That's not a bad analogy. It's not a bad analogy.
Bill Simmons said it best when he said, the trouble with Kanye is he's a genius, but he knows it. I think that pretty much sums it up. Well, when you leave your decade-old social network just lying around, there's bound to be trouble, Jay, which is what Google found out the hard way after they discovered data breaches in the dormant Google Plus platform, which finally forced them to shut the whole thing down instead of fixing the problems. So no more Google Plus, huh?
I mean, if you're running like a digital crack house, like that's going to happen, right? If it's just like left on the corner, like someday people are going to move in who are undesirable. But here's the part that I thought was amazing, Bob. It wasn't in the article you shared, but it was another one I saw on one of the trades, Adweek or Ad Age, or somebody who announced that Google Plus was shutting down. And the article about the Google Plus's demise had 1,600 social media shares. And I was like, man, if they could have gotten those kind of shares, maybe they wouldn't have had to shut down to begin with. Like their obituary was the most shared thing ever about Google Plus, which I think is a really sad and meta commentary.
The irony there, the irony.
Well, unfortunately, Google Plus was the favorite in the Deadpool, so the payout just stunk.
It went off at a 1-2 favorite, right?
So direct-to-consumer was all the rage until recently. Then suddenly, after people started examining the direct-to-consumer space, these fledgling brands realized it's impossible to stay profitable in the face of competition using these tactics, meaning it seems like every single DTC brand eventually goes back to retail brand type actions, Colin. I mean, it's just like... I don't understand. It was supposed to be, everybody was supposed to be able to go direct to consumers and it would be fine. Now everybody's using traditional retail tactics and that's the only way to scale this and make money. Was DTC just a complete sham or is this just poor marketing management as they've grown?
I think it's a combination of things. The company I'm working with right now, Charlotte's Web, has a very successful DTC side of the business. But I think you also need to take into account that you need to be an expert at supply chain logistics. You need to understand the temporal consumer. You need to understand like the financial holdings of the company have to be, in alignment so that you can actually move at that speed. So there's a lot of different things that you need to be able to take into account. And when you just sell in big bulk to a retailer, it takes a lot of that weight off of the company. So there's two ways of looking at it. One, it streamlines your business to be able to just sell to retail and have them worry about all the returns and all the rest of that stuff. But if you have a really tight connection with your consumer, there's nothing that's going to replace that one-to-one relationship, and the data associated with it is huge. So I would opt to say that if you can make the DTC side of your business work, it's going to be a headache, it's going to be hard, but it's going to be worth it in the long run.
And I've got one word for everybody out there, Apple. I mean, Apple is a very successful DTC business. I mean, they do some retail partnerships, but for the most part, it's all DTC. And I think that shows that when you do exactly what you're saying, Colin, when you manage your supply chain, you do quite well on your own. Well, Amazon got kudos for raising wages for warehouse workers, Mike. I mean, they had this big PR crisis going on saying that they were underpaying their workers. And so they solved their PR crisis. They gave everybody a raise and everybody was happy until the workers discovered the company would also be ending stock grants and monthly bonuses, meaning most of the workers would probably be earning much less than they were before the raise. So Amazon back in the doghouse?
I wish they were back in the doghouse. I just think people aren't going to get riled up about it so long as they keep buying cheap stuff from Amazon. I know that's very cynical, but I think it's true.
It's probably very true. And finally, we mentioned Banksy. The ad world was enamored as well with the Banksy's little shredder prank where he shredded one of his own artwork pieces after it was sold for $1.4 million. But the ad world has already co-opted the effort in an endless parade of branding efforts from Perrier to McDonald's. Jay, do people just not understand what that whole shredding thing was about? I mean, it's just like the anti-capitalism, anti-corporate America, anti-commercialism message that was clear in shredding his own artwork after it's sold. You'd think that brands would have caught on that maybe this is not a good idea to associate our brand with that.
It was of the ones that were cited in the article, the one that might have had the best look and feel, the best sort of aesthetic, was ironically McDonald's. And I can imagine Banksy thinking, I did all this just so that McDonald's would have an Instagram photo to post. It feels a little bit counter to the spirit of the act. And not to mention the fact, we talk about this in the book as well. I mean, same as lame, Bob. Like if your content strategy requires you to ape and mimic pop culture to that degree, I don't think you really have a strategy, right? And you're certainly not going to supersede the original. I'm not a big, maybe I'm not the social consultant that I should be, but I'm just not a big hashtag zeitgeist writer. I just feel like it's lazy.
Yeah,
isn't that the core social media strategy that so many people were espousing though back when Oreos did their dunk in the dark thing?
Everybody but me.
Exactly what I was going to say. Yeah.
It's called real-time marketing, and it's as Augie Ray says.
The old RTM, baby.
Personally, I was looking through the posts, and I just think the only thing worse than bad dad jokes are bad brand jokes.
Well, Augie,
that's a book that needs to be written.
Augie Ray is so funny because he always compares real-time marketing to Russian roulette. You pull the trigger on your head over and over and over again until eventually you do something that embarrasses the heck out of yourself. And I think that's pretty much the way that I look at anything to do with real-time marketing. Well, have something to add to this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag AdFail5. That's pound, AdFail, and the number 5. And that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an iTunes listener, we've also provided a direct link to the iTunes Music Store, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory of iTunes. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
You know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, It just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.